we move on to talk about Rafa Benitez, essentially, snubbing Ronaldo as he named Steven Gerrard the best player he coached. Now, number one, this happened on the. By the way, this whole interview that he did on the overlap, was an extremely great watch, extremely great listen. I enjoyed it, and I enjoy a lot of the interviews that they do on that network. I have to say they're a fantastic show. But yeah, Rafa Benitez. Look, he wasn't asked who's the best player he coached. He was discussing Steven Gerrard and how, what places on the pitch that he likes him playing and all that. He was discussing how he was able to fit him with certain players that were at Liverpool at the time because of his unique capabilities. And he dropped the bomb saying Steven Gerrard's the best player I coached. And I couldn't say this while I was Madrid, but now I can. Steven Gerrard's the best player he coached, and yes, he did coach Cristiano Ronaldo. He coached a lot of fantastic players. Rafa Benitez did, but he named Steven Gerrard. And look, we're gonna go from both sides of it. We're gonna go from the angle of him praising Steven Gerrard, and also the angle of him discussing and we're also going to talk about, was this really a snub at Ronaldo? But speaking about Steven Gerrard, I mean, he was a brilliant player. He was great in terms of his ability, his passing range. He had the ability to play the cute and clever balls, had the short range passing, had the long range passing. He was able to do the defensive dirty work. He had the athleticism to get around to defensively. He could tackle. He could defend. He could also score goals. He could be a factor with the late runs he made into the box. And he played with such spirit and personality, and he really put his foot on every game that he played in. He's a brilliant player. He was a brilliant player, and his ball control, his touch, his dribble, he was able to get past players. There was not much weaknesses in his game. In fact, he could do so many things so well that it made it difficult for Liverpool managers and England managers where to fit him. He just had that much quality. He could play in the center of midfield. He could play as a number 10. He could play out in wide midfield positions. He had that nature to do a little bit of everything, and it made it a little bit difficult for coaches to, in that show, Rafa Benitez talks about all about the different places that he would play him. And we know for sure the issues that Sven-Göran Eriksson had fitting him, not only him, but also the likes of Paul Scholes and Frank Lampard. But look, Steven Gerrard, he just couldn't do many things. There was just not much things that he couldn't do. He could literally do everything in that midfield position. Just the ability that he had, and then the fact that he could also, put a tackle in, and he could defend as well. Now you play him as a number 8. You leave your 6 you leave that midfielder a little bit vulnerable because he has, it's his nature to float up and get forward because of the brilliant ability that he has, and that's just him. But he was also good defensively, and he could put in a shift. Later on in his career, he did play in more of a holding sort of role because he had those sort of abilities, and it made it a little bit easier on him for him to preserve his career. And we saw him do that for Liverpool as well, brilliantly as well. But yeah, I mean, there's always the debate discussing Steven Gerrard, Paul Scholes, Frank Lampard. There's always that sort of debate. But for me, Paul Scholes was out of those 3 most technically gifted in terms of he could play every single ball on the pitch. He could play in tight spaces. He was very technically gifted. He was very cute and clever. He was most technically gifted out of them, but he didn't have the physicality he didn't have the physical nature that the players like Lampard and Steven Gerrard had. Lampard, also technically a gifted player, but not quite as gifted as Paul Scholes or even Stevie G to an extent, but he had the best capacity of making the runs into the box, scoring goals, being dynamic, being dynamic, getting 20 plus goals in midfield consistently is an extreme accomplishment, and what he was able to do in terms of goal scoring and in terms of his late runs in the box being hard to track is second to none. Probably the best midfield goal scorer in the Premier League history. But Steven Gerrard, he had everything. He had a little bit of everything, and that's what, for me, out of those three, he was the most complete player. And this is coming from a Chelsea fan. Steven Gerrard, he had that ability, he had that technical ability, he had that passing range, he had that dribbling, he had that ability to go forward and score. He didn't have the ability to score as well as Frank Lampard, but he also had other things that Frank Lampard couldn't do. He wasn't quite as technically gifted in terms of technically gifted in tight spaces as Paul Scholes did, but he was still very gifted himself and had other aspects to his game that Paul Scholes did not have. In the fact that Steven Gerrard was a little bit more threats in terms of scoring a goal, had much more of a defensive nature to him. So for me, when I speak about those three, I have to give that slight edge to Steven Gerrard. They're all three great midfield players, but I do give to Steve Gerrard the edge in terms of, I think from all three, he is the most complete player also. And Rafa Benitez was very forthcoming on his opinion on Steven Gerrard. Going back to snubbing Ronaldo, and that's the main thing here, snubbing Ronaldo. Look, yes, there's a lot of people that are going to say he didn't even get to coach Cristiano Ronaldo for a full year. He won a Premier League with Stevie G. Obviously, he's tied up. It doesn't matter. Let's be honest. That does not matter. Rafa Benitez, if he truly believed Ronaldo was a better player than Steven Gerrard, he would have, he wouldn't say Steven Gerrard is the best player he's coached. This is something Rafa Benitez believes, and I'm not gonna discredit his opinion or anything, because he's watched those two players play. He's seen them in training, he's seen them up close. No matter how long Rafa Benitez was at Real Madrid, he still got to see Ronaldo up close in the 2015-16 season for however long he was manager, and he came to the conclusion that Steven Gerrard was a better player. And I ask you this question: can you imagine Guardiola, Setien, Luis Enrique, Pochettino, any of these managers that has managed Messi to say, oh, Iniesta is better than him? Or for Pochettino's case, Verratti is the best player I coached. Or no, let's imagine Pochettino who's coached Messi, and he coached Messi later on. Okay, maybe Pochettino's not a bad example, but let's go, Pep Guardiola. Would he ever say Iniesta is better than Messi? Or even, let's go to Pochettino. Would he say Moussa Dembele, who's happened to be a very brilliant player, very technically gifted player? Would Pochettino come out and say Dembele is the best player? No. Moussa Dembele is the best player? No. No. So for me, this just adds to the notion that this Messi-Ronaldo debate is as much of a farce as we still think it is. It's really a joke. It's really something perpetrated by the media to give Messi a competitor. Ronaldo is a brilliant player, very gifted, hard-working, talented, but a hard worker in the way that he's been able to turn around his career. But in terms of Messi and his just pure technical ability, and the fact that he still has the ability to get goals himself, and also is a great player in terms of being able to create for his teammates. Look, for me, the Messi-Ronaldo debate is just getting a little bit old. Messi won the World Cup. Messi has 2 Copa Americas now, and I don't like doing this Messi-Ronaldo thing all over again. But it's little things like this with Rafa Benitez snubbing Ronaldo. You don't see that with Messi. How many former teammates have you seen of Ronaldo come out and say Ronaldo's not the best player they've played with? So many. Or how many former Ronaldo teammates have said Messi is better than Ronaldo? Wayne Rooney came out and said Messi is better than Ronaldo. I've heard that from multiple Ronaldo teammates now. That's something you don't hear from Messi teammates. I can't think of one actually from the top of my head, and that's something that Ronaldo fans, they need to ask themselves. Like, am I making all this up? I'm not making this up. But going back to the whole interview that Rafa Benitez did was great. talking about the Champions League final. It was a great in-bit on that. Talking about how he was, that he didn't quite really believe, but he had to sort of fake it till he make it in the locker room when they were down 3-0, even though he didn't really believe that they could really come back. He talked about his relationship with Xabi Alonso, getting kind of grilled from his former player, Jamie Carragher, who was also involved in those teams that had Xabi Alonso, and that sort of falling out that they had. He talked about the Champions League final, of course, that I already talked about. But yeah, overall it's a great interview. So I really enjoyed it, and yeah.